Welcome to Elena, Storyteller, a place where novels, love stories, social psychology, and timeless sayings are retold with deep emotions. Join Elena to listen, empathize, and embark on the emotional journey of today's story.
Chapter 1: The Fateful Auction. London was shrouded in a thick autumn fog. The yellow glow of the street lamps spilled over rain-soaked cobblestone streets, reflecting like shards of broken glass. James Walker, a young painter, was making his way back to his shabby flat in South Kensington when his eyes caught a small sign hanging in front of a 3-story Georgian house. Art auction, one day only. He froze. A spark of curiosity mixed with desire stirred in his chest, the same burning desire that had haunted him since the day he set foot in London with dreams of becoming a celebrated artist. For months, his paintings had barely earned a place in forgotten cafes with few customers. James needed an opportunity, something extraordinary that might pull his name out of obscurity. And perhaps that opportunity was waiting behind the old wooden door before him. The door stood ajar. Murmurs drifted out. The rhythmic voice of an auctioneer, the clack of a gavel, the low buzz of collectors whispering. James drew a deep breath and stepped inside. The hall was ablaze with the brilliance of a crystal chandelier. Paintings lined the walls, marble busts rested upon carved pedestals. The air exuded wealth and refinement, so far removed from James's threadbare existence. He weaved through the crowd, his eyes scanning the pieces on offer. A serene countryside landscape, a nobleman's portrait, a collection of antique silverware. All beautiful, yes, but none held him. Until he saw it. In a dim corner stood a large canvas, not hung like the others but propped against the wall, hidden beneath a heavy black cloth. Perhaps too old or too unusual to display openly. A chill swept over James, yet it drew him closer, compelled by some unseen force. The auctioneer noticed his interest and approached, lowering his voice as if not wishing others to hear. "Interested in that one, sir. I must warn you, it carries a rather troubled history." James furrowed his brows. Troubled, how so? The man glanced around, then pulled back half the cloth. Light spilled across the portrait. A young woman, her face pale, almost lifeless, lips parted slightly. But it was her eyes, dark, fathomless, piercing straight into the soul, that froze James in place. A wave of cold washed through him, as though she weren't a creation of paint and brush, but something alive, watching. The auctioneer's voice dropped to a near whisper. "This painting has passed through many hands. Curiously, misfortune followed every owner. Some went bankrupt, others vanished without a trace. They call it the blood portrait." James swallowed hard. Fear twisted with longing inside him. He thought of his barren studio, of critics dismissing his work as soulless. But this portrait, this one breathed. It had a spirit, a presence. If he possessed it, perhaps it would change everything. The painting was brought to the floor. The auctioneer gave a short introduction, his tone still edged with reluctance, then announced the starting bid. The atmosphere shifted. Some shook their heads, others chuckled dismissively. Clearly, no one wished to claim something rumored to be cursed. James's heart thundered. This was his moment. He raised his paddle. £100. Whispers rippled through the room. Eyes turned toward him, yet no one challenged the bid. Once, twice, the gavel came down. Sold. In an instant, the portrait belonged to James Walker. He left the auction house under a night sky, clutching the wrapped canvas close. Raindrops clung to his coat, but he hardly noticed. Excitement and unease surged within him, entwined. He felt it. His life would never be the same again. But from the second-floor window, the aging auctioneer watched his figure disappear into the fog. The man shook his head slowly, murmuring to himself. A new soul has stepped into the spiral. Chapter 2: The First Dreams. That night, London was drowned beneath a curtain of thick fog. The street lamps cast a faint, sickly glow, like dying candles about to be snuffed out. James staggered up to his third-floor flat, lugging the heavy portrait in his arms. The rented room contained little more than an old easel, a few boxes of oil paints, and scattered sketches littering the floor. He propped the portrait against the wall opposite his bed and pulled away the heavy cloth. The dim yellow light fell across the girl's face. Again, those eyes stole his breath. They didn't merely look at him, they seemed to pierce through his skin, seeping into his bones. James shuddered involuntarily. He forced a laugh to chase away the unease. "Just a painting, James. An old painting. You're being too sensitive." Pouring himself a glass of cheap wine, he sat on the bed. But no matter how he tried to look away, those eyes remained etched in his mind, haunting, inescapable. Night slipped by. James drifted into sleep. He dreamed. In the dream, he stood inside a pitch-dark room, lit only by flickering candles that threw quivering shadows across damp, mold-stained walls. The air was thick with the odor of oil paint, rotting wood, and blood. Chains rattled somewhere in the darkness. James spun around, his heart racing. Before him sat an old wooden chair. On it, a young woman was bound, wrists tied tightly, her brown hair spilling forward to veil half her face. He tried to step closer, but each footfall dragged as though the floor were pulling him down. The candlelight flared, and he froze. It was her, the girl from the portrait. Her eyes were wide, filled with despair yet pleading. Her lips moved, forming a broken whisper. "Help me." James's chest tightened. He reached forward, desperate to untie her, but a deep, guttural voice cut through the silence. "Don't touch her. She belongs to me." He spun around. In the wavering light stood a towering figure of a man, clutching a brush, his cloak smeared with dark crimson, paint, or blood. His face was indistinct, but his eyes gleamed like a predator's, watching, waiting. Before James could react, screams erupted. Blood gushed from nowhere, splattering the walls, streaming across the floor. The girl shrieked, and the room was swallowed in darkness. James bolted upright, drenched in sweat. Streetlights spilled faintly through the window, illuminating the portrait opposite his bed. He panted, struggling to steady himself. Then his heart lurched. The girl's lips, those painted lips, had curved into the faintest, coldest smile. The next morning, James woke exhausted, his body leaden. The nightmare lingered, so vivid it felt carved into his mind. The stench of blood, the flickering light, the clang of iron chains. He told himself it was only imagination, the residue of the auctioneer's grim story. But when he sat before his easel, brush in hand, something strange happened. His fingers refused to obey. Instead of his own work, he found himself sketching her. Again and again, the same face filled his pages. Those eyes, sharper, colder, more alive with every stroke. By the time he realized, the floor was strewn with sketches, all bearing her likeness. Eyes wide open, staring straight through him. James dropped the pencil, stumbling back, his pulse hammering. His gaze shot toward the portrait. The painted eyes met his, calm, sorrowful, and yet waiting. A chill crept down his spine. He knew then, this was no mere painting. It carried a story, a secret, perhaps even a curse. Pushpin end of chapter 2. James resolves to uncover the portrait's origins. Unaware, he has already set foot on a path leading into an abyss with no escape. Chapter 3. A Bloody History. James woke with dark circles under his eyes. All night, strange dreams had tormented him. In them, he once again saw the darkened room filled with the smell of wax, the clash of metal, and a strangled scream. Even awake, his heart pounded, and cold sweat clung to his back. He stepped into the living room. The dim morning light filtered through the curtains, falling on the portrait. The eyes in the painting seemed to be staring directly at him, motionless, yet brimming with life. James swallowed hard. He knew he could not let this go on. If he didn't uncover the truth, he would lose his mind. Open book, the library, and secrets in the shadows. James went to the British Library. Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old paper, aged wood, and the dust of centuries. He walked quietly along the endless corridors, the towering shelves like walls of a fortress, the faint golden lamps adding to the air of antiquity and gloom. He searched through the archives of 19th century painters. After hours of combing through files, his fingers stopped on a battered old folder, its spine torn, the title faded. Alastair Crowden, His Life and Lost Works. James opened it, scanning the opening lines. Alastair Crowden, born in 1827, a talented yet eccentric painter. His works were renowned for their unnerving lifelike quality, the eyes of his subjects appearing to gaze straight through the viewer. But with his fame came whispers of something darker. James skimmed quickly, until one passage made his hand tremble. Crowden believed true art must capture the soul. He claimed that only in the grip of utter terror does the soul fully reveal itself. Many models who once posed for him vanished without a trace. James froze. Each word etched itself into his mind like a hammer blow. Cold sweat trickled down his temples, and his hand gripped the desk edge tight. The newspaper from 1879. He kept searching and found a yellowed newspaper, dated October 14th, 1879. The headline screamed, "Body of young woman found in artist's studio." James felt his heart stop. He read every word carefully. The corpse of a young woman, around 20, identity unknown, was discovered inside the studio of Alastair Crowden. Police investigated but found no sign of Crowden. The suspect vanished without a trace. At the scene, an unfinished portrait stood on the easel. The face in the painting matched the victim, her wide, open eyes filled with terror, identical to her lifeless state. James slammed the paper shut, his hands shaking violently. He drew in a deep breath, but his chest remained tight. The scenes from his dream, the desperate eyes, the stifled cries, were no longer illusions. They had truly happened. Candle the diary of a witness. In another folder, James found several loose pages, seemingly the notes of a scholar who had studied Crowden. The handwriting was shaky but legible. Some said that on late nights, they saw light flickering from Crowden's studio windows, along with faint cries. When they knocked, he would only smile and say, "The model must immerse themselves more deeply." One line, underlined in red, chilled James to the bone. Crowden once said, "To bind the soul within the canvas, one must release the body. Only blood can seal the face." James stared, stunned. The words echoed like whispers from afar, the same voice he had heard in his dreams. Derelict clue from the auction house. Unable to stop at the library, James returned to the auction house where he had bought the portrait. The shop sat on a damp, narrow street, its faded sign barely lit by a dim yellow lamp. Inside, old Mr. Harrow, the manager, hunched over a ledger. Seeing James, he frowned and said slowly, "I thought you wouldn't come back." James forced a smile, his voice hoarse. "I need to know more about the painting. Please, it's haunting me." Mr. Harrow stared at him for a long moment. In his eyes flickered both pity and fear. At last, he sighed, opened a dusty drawer, and took out a yellowed scrap of paper, its ink nearly faded. On it were only a few words. Hilford Manor, northern outskirts of London. The last residence of Alastair Crowden. Mr. Harrow whispered, "That's where the painting was found. But take my advice, never set foot there. No one has ever returned unchanged after touching Crowden's legacy." James held the note. A chill spread from his fingertips down his spine. Waxing crescent moon, the dark night, and the whisper. Back at his flat, James resolved to take the portrait down. But as he approached, the eyes suddenly glowed in the lamplight like smoldering embers. He staggered back, heart racing. In his ears, a whisper slithered, faint, undeniable, and not of his imagination. "Find me, free me." James went pale, his body trembling. He clutched the scrap with Hilford Manor's address. Though reason screamed for him to stop, an unseen force pulled him onward. He had to know the truth. Chapter 4, Hilford Manor. The road to Hilford Manor wound through desolate fields shrouded in thick fog. James drove in silence, his hands slick with sweat gripping the wheel. From afar, the mansion loomed like a colossal shadow in the mist. Cracked gray stone walls, jagged roof tiles like rotten teeth, and dark windows that resembled the hollow eye sockets of a dead giant. He stopped the car and stepped out. The icy air struck his face, carrying the stench of mold mixed with the metallic tang of rust. For a long moment, he stood still, staring at the building. A wave of familiarity swept over him. This was the very place from his dreams, only in reality, it was 100 times more terrifying. The cursed door. The wooden door was rotting, its rusty hinges groaning as James pushed with all his strength. A draft of freezing air spilled out, heavy with the suffocating stench of decay, as if the house had swallowed centuries whole. He switched on his flashlight and stepped inside. A long corridor stretched ahead, its walls lined with dusty portraits. As the beam swept past, the faces seemed to follow his every move. The air thickened, heavy enough to choke. A loud thud echoed from upstairs. James flinched, his heart leaping into his throat. He swallowed hard, whispering to himself, "Just the wind, only the wind." But deep down, he knew something was moving in the house. Candle the painter's studio. James pressed on until he found Crowden's old studio. The door stood ajar, faint handprints smudged across its surface. He nudged it open, and the hinges screeched like nails on glass. Inside, the vast room lay under a shroud of dust. The ceiling was cracked, exposing rotted beams. Moonlight filtered through the broken window, falling on a splintered easel in the center. Shredded canvases littered the floor. A few unfinished paintings remained, faces of women, their eyes wide with despair, brushstrokes abruptly broken off, streaks of color blurred like dried blood. James knelt, trembling, and touched the corner of one canvas. It was icy cold, like the skin of the dead. He jerked his hand back instantly. On the wall, words were carved deep into the plaster, jagged and frantic, in English and strange symbols. The soul must be bound. Only blood can seal it. James shuddered. These were the same words he had read in the diary at the library. "I the eyes in the mirror." In the corner stood a large mirror, its surface fractured into spiderweb cracks. James swept his flashlight across it and nearly fell back. In the glass, he saw not only his own reflection, but also that of a woman standing behind him. Her face was pale, her dark eyes hollow with unspeakable pain. Long black hair spilled over her shoulders. He spun around, nothing. When he turned back, she was still there in the mirror. This time, her lips moved, forming silent words. James could read them clearly. "Help me." A chill surged down his spine. He stumbled backward, heart hammering in his chest. Scroll the notebook in the dark. As his breathing steadied, he noticed a thick notebook lying on the desk, its leather cover peeling. With shaking hands, he opened it. The pages inside were filled with frantic sketches of women's faces, crying, screaming, despairing. Beneath each was a scrawl of words, slanted and feverish. "Tonight, she will be mine. Only through suffering does the soul reveal itself. I am almost done, just need blood." James let the book slip from his hands. It hit the floor with a dry thud. Suddenly, the room seemed to close in around him, the walls of the studio darkening, pressing tight, suffocating. "New moon, the whisper." From the corner came a faint voice, like wind seeping through a crack in the door. "You have come at last." James froze, breath ragged. "Who's there?" No reply, only the rattle of chains, faint yet unmistakable, echoing as though from deep underground. His flashlight flickered, then died. Darkness swallowed the room whole. In that suffocating void, two glowing eyes emerged, floating pale like will-o'-the-wisps. They were the same eyes as those in the portrait hanging in his flat. James stumbled back, tripping and crashing to the floor, his heartbeat roaring in his ears. And then, a cold hand gripped his shoulder. Pushpin end of chapter 4. James comes face to face with the spirit bound within the painting. But is she a desperate victim crying for salvation, or the lure to drag him into Alistair Crowden's bloody snare? Chapter 5. Whispers in the Dark. James fled from Hilford Manor like a man escaping from hell itself. The old wooden door groaned loudly as he shoved it open, and the cold wind lashed his face, carrying the musty scent of decay and dried blood. He raced to his car, hands trembling as he fumbled for the keys. When the engine roared to life, James dared not look back. He knew that if he glanced even once more, he would see those eyes, the haunting eyes in the painting. The road back to London was pitch black, headlights cutting through the thick fog. But no matter how far he drove, James could still hear the metallic clinking of chains echoing in his mind. Every bend, every shadow of a tree flicking past the window, he imagined the figure of the young woman in the portrait following the car. Waxing crescent moon shadows intrude. That night, James collapsed onto his bed, utterly exhausted. He switched on every light in his apartment, but the pale yellow glow only made the space feel more eerie. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. Yet, the moment he closed his eyes, that voice returned, soft, pleading, as if right beside him. "James, don't leave me." He shot upright, heart hammering, cold sweat soaking his back. The room was empty, but the portrait on the wall had changed. The young woman's lips curved slightly, not with helpless sadness, but with a fragile, almost welcoming smile, as if greeting him back. James stepped back, his back pressing against the wall. He shut his eyes tightly and whispered, "It can't be, just my imagination." Black stolen sketches. The next morning, James tried to throw himself into work. Hopping painting would distract him. He set his easel by the window, sunlight spilling across the canvas as his brush glided. But when he looked up, the face on the canvas was not his chosen subject. It was the young woman from the old portrait. Her eyes were empty, her lips parted in a silent plea. Panicking, James threw down the brush and tore the canvas apart. But then he noticed other sketches scattered across the floor, faces he didn't remember drawing. Her crying, screaming hands raised as if begging. He whispered shakily, "No, I didn't draw these, I did." I, the reflection. That afternoon, James washed his face in the bathroom. Hopping the cold water would clear his dizzy mind. But when he looked up at the mirror, his heart nearly stopped. In the reflection, he no longer saw himself. Instead, he saw Crowden, the mad painter from old photographs. Gaunt face, bulging red eyes, twisted smile. James screamed and struck the mirror. Glass shattered everywhere, but the last thing he saw before it cracked completely was Crowden's face, whispering. Every artist must complete their work. Open book clues in the journal. Panicked, James dashed from his apartment and returned to the old library. He sifted through documents about Crowden until he found an old, hidden journal. The yellowed pages recounted rumors. Crowden believed that to capture a soul, one must take the life of the model. Only by mixing the victim's blood with paint could the soul be sealed into the canvas. A trembling line at the bottom chilled James to the bone. Whoever owns the portrait inherits the curse. Artist or victim, no escape. James closed the book, hands shaking. Images from the previous night replayed in his mind. Cold hands on his shoulder, dim, glowing eyes in the darkness. He began to understand. The spirit in the painting wasn't merely begging for help. She wanted to draw him into the never-ending, deadly performance. New moon the call. That night, James could not sleep. He sat motionless before the portrait. The warm lamplight fell across the young woman's face, her eyes glimmering with tears that seemed almost alive. Then a whisper came again, clearer than ever. "James, finish it for me, or in her place." The room grew icy. James clutched his head, screaming, "Stop, stop." Yet the painting shivered slightly, as if something inside was Chapter 6, The Ghost Manifests. James's apartment was unnervingly silent that night. No ticking clocks, no distant hum of traffic. London itself seemed to vanish, leaving only a terrifying void surrounding him and the portrait. He sat motionless before the painting. The girl's eyes still watched him, now pulsing with a life of their own, beating in rhythm with his own breath. He whispered, "What do you want from me?" No answer, yet the space seemed to tremble, as if a thin membrane were cracking around him. Waxing crescent moon, when the painting becomes a prison. The room's lights flickered, then went out. Only the pale, cold light of the moon spilled through the window. James saw the portrait move. The girl's skin quivered, strands of hair shifted gently. Then, a pale hand stretched out from the canvas, scratching violently at the wooden frame. A shrill scraping echoed like nails on metal throughout the room. James froze, mouth open, unable to scream. The girl's face lifted, lips barely moving. "Help me, free me, or in my place." Signs of blood. James leapt up, flipping on the lights, but the glow did nothing to dispel the horror. The canvas was streaked with red, as if blood were seeping through the fibers, dripping onto the floor. The coppery stench hit his nose, making him gag. On his desk lay a utility knife smeared with blood he didn't remember, and he realized in horror. His own hands were streaked crimson. "No, it's not mine, it can't be," he screamed, throwing the knife away. But a faint, chilling giggle echoed from the painting, innocent yet wicked. Eye confrontation. James turned, and for the first time saw her in the flesh. The girl stood in the middle of the room, frail in a tattered white dress. Her long hair veiled part of her face. Her deep black eyes locked onto his, bottomless pits of despair. The air was icy. Each breath he exhaled seemed to turn to smoke. He backed against the wall. Who are you?" he stammered, even as he knew the answer. She stepped closer, each footfall dragging with the metallic clink of chains. Glancing down, James saw shackles across her ankles, scraping the floor with a horrifying sound. She whispered, "I am all that remains inside the painting. Crowden trapped me, and now it's your turn." Open book, the curse revealed. James remembered Crowden's journal. The painter or the victim? His heart pounded. That meant he had to choose. Either become the murderer, completing the portrait with blood, or be trapped forever in the canvas, replacing the girl's spirit. "No, I'm not him. I won't kill anyone," James shouted. But her face twisted. Her eyes glowed red, the corners of her mouth stretching into a mad, grotesque grin. "You have no choice, James. Only two paths remain: kill or die." New moon possession. James clutched his head as a sharp pain tore through his brain. Images overlapped. Crowden before the easel, hands dripping with blood, the girl screaming in chains, and himself holding the knife and brush, painting her face in crimson. He collapsed, hands digging into the floor. When he raised his eyes, the mirror on the wall reflected not him, but Crowden staring back. That face grinned, the same smile he had just seen in the painting. Candle, the final whisper. The girl drew close, her icy breath brushing James's ear. She whispered, her voice a generational curse. "You must choose, before this moonlit night ends." Moonlight fell on the portrait. Now, not only was the girl in the painting visible, but a second figure began to emerge, the face of James himself, painted in streaks of blood. He collapsed, eyes wide, horrified to realize. His life was being etched into the canvas. Chapter 7, The Final Curse. James panted, hands trembling, eyes glued to the portrait. Moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the cracked paint and making the girl's face shimmer as if she were alive. Beside her, a second figure began to take shape. James's own face, distorted beyond recognition, eyes wide with fear and despair. Crowden's words from the journal echoed in his mind. The painter or the victim. Only one soul can be free. The other will take its place forever. High voltage, a life or death decision. James's heart pounded as if it might burst. He stumbled back into the easel. On the desk lay the blood-smeared utility knife and brushes streaked with deep red. Whispering voices echoed in his ears. Choose before dawn. James realized, if he did nothing, the girl's soul would remain trapped. But if he used the knife, his blood would stain the canvas, and the curse would continue with him. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and made a decision. Blood and light. Opening his eyes, James picked up a brush and touched the fresh blood on the desk. He did not cut, did not harm anyone. Instead, he began carefully repainting the portrait, using brush and red paint to recreate the girl's image with reverence. Each stroke, each curve, he imagined her soul breathing, alive. The girl in the painting shivered. The whispers became a voice. "Thank you." Moonlight filtered through, making the red paint shimmer. Gradually, James's reflection in the portrait faded. A cold gust swept through the room, stirring a cloud of dust. When it settled, only the girl remained, standing upright, gentle eyes, no trace of fear. James collapsed, drenched in sweat, heart racing. He had survived the most vivid nightmare, yet the painting was now silent, unmoving, the whispers gone. New moon, a chilling twist. James sighed, thinking the curse had ended. But when he looked up, his gaze fell on another, smaller painting he had never noticed. Inside the frame was the image of a middle-aged man, eyes serious, lips curled in a faint smile. Strangely, his hand seemed to gesture, beckoning James, as if the painting had recorded everything that had just happened. Shivering, James realized something terrifying. The curse had not ended. It had only taken another form, waiting for the next victim. And now, he had become part of it. Anyone who gazed upon the portrait might hear whispers from the freed soul, but might also face the next nightmare. Milky Way open ending. James returned the portrait to its easel, sitting on the floor, sweat mingling with dried red stains on his hands. He knew he had saved the girl that night, but the world still held souls trapped in paint, and the curse would claim its next target. Outside, London remained peaceful. Yet in the small apartment, the portrait silently watched, waiting. And somewhere, softly but clearly, a whisper rose. "You will be next." Pushpin the end, but the curse of the blood portrait has never truly ended.
Thank you so much for watching until the end. Don't forget to subscribe to support Elena, storyteller, and stay tuned for the next heartfelt video.